Welcome to my breakdown of episode 3 of season 3 of the White Lotus. The meaning of dreams is the title of this week's episode, and look, it perfectly describes how I was dreaming, wishing this episode was more exciting. No, but jokes aside, this wasn't my favorite episode thus far, but there's still a lot to discuss with everything going on with Rick having a bad trip. We have Belinda setting her sights on Greg Gary, and Timothy does his best to avoid the shitstorm at his front door. Let's get into my breakdown of this episode, spoilers ahead. Now, talk about dark and ominous as we open this episode with seeing this dream that Victoria's having where she's on a beach and she sees Jaclyn with the two waiters from last episode and him saying that this is what it looks like before the tsunami. Now, Victoria wrapped in blankets and we see her walking towards the tsunami as she eventually awakens. Now, to me, this could be read as Victoria speaking to her own intuition about everything going on with the case with Kenny, even though she doesn't know what's going on, but that makes me think that she also is probably hearing the conversation that Tim is having on the phone, and what is being discussed over the phone is seeping into her subconscious while she's in and out of sleep. Now, the visuals being a metaphor for the calm before the storm and her walking towards it. But speaking to Victoria seeing her son with the two trans women that we saw in last episode, could that be foreshadowing for later? Now, outside we see Tim's on the phone with a person by the name of Joe, who I'm assuming is his lawyer, as he gives him the rundown of everything. Now, according to the subtitles, Tim says that him and Kenny first met up 15 years ago and he worked at a Markham Bradford in the division in Asia. Now, Tim says he helped Kenny out, set up some fun by the name of Show Cow, and it sounds like there's a lot more to the story that Tim left out. Again, outside we see that it's raining and storming, and basically this is the through line of the visual language and symbolizing what's coming towards the Ratliff family and maybe others in the show as well. Now, at breakfast we see our friend group being greeted by Shatala and Fabian, and Rick watches and sets his course on finally speaking to her. Now, Victoria shares her dreams with her family, and Piper suggests that it could be a warning. Meanwhile, her other brother suggests otherwise.
So, dreams predict the future now.
It's the collective unconscious.
Yeah, and we all dream about fire and snakes because we're all afraid of fire and snakes. I mean, it's not that deep.
Now, we see that Tim's phone is blowing up at this point and he's just continuously ignoring it, but the rest of the family notices and asks him if everything's okay. Now, eventually Tim listens to those voicemails from the missed calls, and it's his office telling him that the FBI has a warrant and they're currently in his office. Now, it seems like Jaclyn has some type of obsession or interest in tsunamis, as he shows his dad one where this guy is on the beach and basically does the same thing that Victoria did in her dreams, which is letting the tsunami consume him. I think the symbolism so far is a bit heavy-handed, but we see Saxon is getting calls now, but he hasn't gotten the full picture quite yet. Now, in comes a character I hope we get more time in spending with her, and that's Pam, as she arrives with Saxon's blenders for his shakes, and it causing him to be distracted for a minute as his phone is blowing up as well. Now, Tim has to come up with a way to keep avoiding the problem back home, so he decides to accept the no digital devices policy and gives their phones and electronics to Pam.
It's a rare thing that we're together like this. So let's make the most of it. Let's make this week special, right?
Now, obviously, he's doing this because the office is blowing him up and he's avoiding his problems. But I also think that he might have meant what he said about this being a special week, because I think deep down he knows this is probably going to be the last vacation he gets to experience with his family before going back home to face what's going on. Or, as we'll talk about a little bit later, I think Tim might actually take his own life. Now, Saxon's clearly pissed and complains that Piper always gets what she wants, as we see the father pulling him aside and puts a more positive spin on giving up their electronics and suggests that it will allow them to be more present and be more in the moment and giving them some space to develop. As we see the watches, the computers, and all the phones go with Pam. Now, cut to my guy Gaitok as Sitala asks him how he's doing after the robbery. She calls him brave, which leads to him offering his services to be an additional service as a bodyguard for her trip. Now, back with Rick, he seizes the opportunity to finally approaching Sitala. Now, for the first time this season, we see Rick like never before, as he's acting chipper and cheerful and playful as he praises her performance from the night before. Now, he tells her this story that he's a producer and working with a high-profile project, and he would love for her to take a meeting with this very fun director. Now, obviously, we know that he knows that she's going to Bangkok and says that that's where the director is, and he gets her personal contact. Now, Rick returns to Chelsea, and he's back to his normal ways with being secretive, as Chelsea says that that's him just being a Scorpio and all. Now, we see Amrita encourages Rick to join her again for another session with her, as he reluctantly agrees. Now, he tells Chelsea about his sudden trip, which upsets her because she's going to be alone, and he tells her that maybe she'll meet another guy who's richer than him that she can sponge off of. Now, back with our ladies, Valentine tells them their health plan for the day, which includes yoga and a session with a energy healer. Now, within this conversation, we find out that Valentine has been at the White Lotus for 3 years now, and this is where Jaclyn kind of sneakily interrogates him by asking him if he came with any family, or more importantly, if he came with a girlfriend, which he said he didn't, which is the perfect opportunity for Laurie to have a fling with him, as Jaclyn sets up Laurie with the healing session for a little bit later. Now, after relinquishing their electronics, we see the brothers at the pool where Saxon promises to help Lachlan get laid by the end of the week. Meanwhile, we continue to get the setup of Saxon making sure that he's seen or at least noticed by Chelsea and Chloe. Now, speaking of being seen, we see Gaitok sees Mook and tells her about the interaction with Sitala. Now, she's proud of him, he's happy to share this with her, and look, I know this relationship will probably not end well based on the show's history with relationships at work, but man, I am rooting for them because their scenes have been so innocent, been so pure and tender, and I want my guy Gaitok to get the girl, but again, I just don't think it's gonna be a happily ever after ending for these two. Now, as we see this other session with Rick, he peels the onion back just a little bit and tells Amrita that he's done some bad things and made some terrible mistakes in his past. He talks about hearing how his father was said to be a good man, but again, he never got to experience that because he was murdered and he can't get his life back, but he does go on to say the following.
Maybe I can still get some satisfaction.
Now, I shared my theories last week about Rick's plan with the Hollingers having some involvement of his father's murder, and it's starting to look more and more like that's the way that the story is headed. Now, back with Piper, we see her visiting the monastery again, and she sets up an appointment for later in the week, and we see her basically envisioning what life could be like when she potentially revisits the program next summer. Now, during all this, we see Laurie getting her energy session with Valentine. We also spend some time with Lachlan with his posture session. Now, here he's told that based on his posture that he's a people pleaser, as he says that he's from a family with a lot of big personalities. Now, the teacher says that he's defensive when he sits down, and it's because he's protecting himself from his more feminine side. Again, if you see my previous breakdowns, this opens up my thoughts about him exploring his sexuality and maybe being afraid of expressing himself in fear of being judged or shamed by some of his family members, particularly his brother, his dad, and his mom. Now, at this point in this episode, we're like 30 minutes in, and it's at the end of the first half of the episode, and while I'm patient, I like storytelling, I like these characters experiencing little moments of reflection and whatnot, and setting up Rick and Timothy, but honestly, a whole lot of nothing was going on this first half, and it felt very uneventful, but things kind of change up in the second half of the episode. Now, we get this conversation that debunks my theory about Chloe being involved with Tanya's death, as she's talking to Chelsea about Gary being secretive, which, by the way, shout out to those who pointed this out in the comments last week, and that's how Chloe calls Greg Gary. She tells Chelsea that he's got an ex-wife and he never talks about her, and all she knows is that the ex-wife was a real mental patient. Now, as the conversation goes on, we hear Chloe telling Chelsea that his ex-wife unalived herself. Now, the way she explained the story obviously wasn't true, but the conversation ends because Chelsea leaves to go in town with Rick, who's going to get some weed. I also want to point out how Chelsea and Chloe are already best friends as they're telling each other they love each other, which to me kind of speaks to how like they might have like attachment issues where they can just fall for people so easily, which explains how Chloe got involved with Greg/Gary. Now, Saxon takes this chance to introduce himself to Chloe, and you definitely get the vibe that Chloe was sending vibes that she's interested to see where this could go, and Rick's assessment of her profession could possibly be true. Now we see the Hollander guys mocking Gaitok after hearing his offer from earlier in an episode. Now he tells them that he isn't trying to replace them and replace their jobs, which is something they're not too afraid of because they tell him that after the robbery, he was actually about to get fired, but Sitala prevented the firing from happening. Now I'm not sure if they're just messing with him or if it is to be true that he was almost fired, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case because technically while I do love Gaitok, he did kind of mess up on his job by letting the robbery take place. Now back with Rick and Chelsea, we see the weed seems to relax him and loosens him up a lot. He wants to have some fun and he tells her that he doesn't want to go to dinner with Chloe and Gary/Greg, and he sees this snake show and he goes that way to go check it out. Now, to me, this scene leads into the idea of how drugs can be a gateway to escape your mind and your problems, as we see Timothy stressing in front of Victoria, who offers him one of her pills to take, as she says that it's going to help him lay off some stress. Now, Victoria convinces her husband that this isn't an addictive drug, but as we'll talk about later, that doesn't seem to be the case with Mr. Timothy. Now, back with Rick and Chelsea, they're discussing the snakes being in cages, and to me, the subtext in this scene is Rick seeing himself as one of these snakes being called venomous and her saying that they should be locked up because they hurt people, they bite people, but in his eyes, they have the right to be free. It's almost like he sees himself in a situation, whatever his past is and his terrible things that he's done, he's now free, so he sees again himself in these snakes. Now, during the show, we see Rick seems to be in this very euphoric state of mind as he watches these deadly cobras being tamed and played with by the expert. Now, similar to the mentioning of the pong pong tree and the deadly seeds, we have this snake scene kind of setting up something that's going to happen to Chelsea here in a second, but on a complete side note, I have to talk about this. The guy commentating the event says one of my greatest fears of all time about how the cobras can get into toilets sometimes and they can bite people that are using it. Seriously, the thought of that alone just scares the hell out of me, so let's just have some fun in the comments. Comment below some of your wildest fears of things that have little to no chance of actually happening, but it still scares the hell out of you just thinking about it. If it could happen, share some of your frightening fears in the comments below. Now, either this weed is super potent, or as he says later, is laced with something else, or it could be a little bit of the therapy session. We see Rick leaves the show and he decides to open the cages, holding those venomous snakes in them as he lets them free. But now going back to a callback to just moments ago, we see the snake situation plays out as Chelsea goes to check on him and finds him holding the snake in his hand as she unfortunately gets bitten in the leg and she's rushed to the hospital as Rick hitches a ride to follow her. Now, talking about our nighttime scenes in this week's episode, we see Chelsea is okay as Rick tells Chloe his reasoning to letting the cobras go is because he thinks the weed was laced. Now, Chloe brings up the fact that this is the second time that Chelsea's faced death and maybe should hang back for tomorrow's boat trip, a trip that Rick wasn't aware of until now. I know some of you all think that Chelsea might be the person that might end up dead by the end of the season, but I think Chelsea's going to be okay. I don't think her and Rick was going to make it out of this vacation like as a couple together potentially, but I think Chelsea has enough good juju that she's going to be okay. Hopefully, because I like her a lot, but who knows. Now back with our friend group, we see them having a bit of a laugh about Laurie's time with Valentine, as she even admits that it's been a while since a man has touched her in such an intimate way. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting for me in this episode. This is probably my favorite scene as we see Kate expresses her feelings towards energy healings of them either being spooky or goofy, as Jaclyn explains her enjoyment of them because other religions, such as Christianity, are targeted more towards men. Now, Kate goes on to explain how going to church and being a Christian is her jam. It moves her and it makes her feel good. Now, remember my comments last week of me mentioning how it's just going to be a matter of time before Laurie and Jaclyn find something to bond over to hate on about Kate. Well, it finally is here. Now, Kate says that she goes to church every single Sunday, and based on Jaclyn and Laurie's reaction, it seemed to come to a surprise for them. Now, Jaclyn shares her concerns about Kate's time at a Texas church because of them being a red state and being Trump supporters, and it must be difficult for Kate.
You didn't vote for Trump, though, did you?
Are we really going to talk about Trump tonight?
And here it is, as you can just see the pure horror and disbelief on Jaclyn's face. This moment here just killed me. Now look, we're not going to get into politics, who I voted for, who you voted for, and all that different stuff, but I think we can all agree. that things that can break up a marriage, or in this case, a friendship, are finances, religion, and politics. So for those at home keeping score, let's break this down. So far, Kate and Jaclyn bond over Laurie's life choices in living in New York City with a daughter and being so career driven, and also she drinks more than them. Then we have Laurie and Kate bonding over Jaclyn being a narcissist and her husband and her obsession with her looks. And now we have Jaclyn and Laurie sharing a level of discomfort with Kate's religious experience and also her political beliefs. Again, this is my favorite part of the episode because this sets up a pretty toxic confrontation between the friends that I think is going to be really entertaining to see once we finally get to that point in the season. Now, we didn't spend a lot of time with Belinda and Punchai in this episode, but in this moment, we see her sharing her recent experience with depression from some recent events, or should I say recent deaths at work. She goes over what happens to Armand back in season 1, but she also shares her story about Tanya and tells Punchai that she thinks that she recognized the guy Tanya left with, and she thinks that it's time to go see if it is him. As we watch, Belinda goes to their table, and the look on Gary's face is hilarious because it's like he almost saw a ghost.
Greg, isn't it?
It's Gary.
Huh. Really?
Now, Greg/Gary's spot is slowly getting blown up, and Tanya's ghost isn't done with him yet. I'm really liking where this story is going so far, like justice for Tanya, finally. But I know one thing, Greg or Gary better not hurt Belinda. Now back with the Ratliff family, we see Saxon got the invite from Chloe about the whole boat trip going on the next day, and he extends the invite to the rest of his family. And I got a kind of a kick out of this moment here because we see Victoria's concerned about if they're decent people or if they're trashy. I got a kick out of this scene because it kind of separates how rich people think about other rich people. Like, for example, the Ratliff family, you would imagine they come from money, where you have Greg that stumbled upon money, and how Victoria seems to look at people like that as trash. Now, during all this, we see Timothy is knocked out in bed from those pills, and it goes to show just how effective they are, and it goes to also show to why Victoria was knocked out for most of episode 1. Now, we get this little eye stare off moment between characters of Belinda, Greg/Gary. We also have Chloe and Sexton kind of giving each other a look down, and while all this is happening, we have the new theme song playing in the background. Which, speaking of the theme song, I guess we never discussed this, but I personally really enjoy the new song. Now, while it's not as great as maybe season 1 and 2, but I still get down with it, man. Like, I really enjoy this new theme, so let me know in the comments if you like it, if you hate it, or if you initially hated it, but it's slowly starting to grow on you. Now, as we come to a close of this week's episode, we see Gaitok being told by what I'm assuming is his manager, telling him that they're going to have a meeting in the morning about the recent robbery. Now, based on the trailer of this season, I bet the conversation in the morning is going to be his manager teaching Gaitok how to use a gun. Now, we see Rick is leaving a message to some guy by the name of Frank, and he talks about setting up a meeting with him in Bangkok for some help. As Chelsea confronts him about the snake freeing experience, and more talk about religion as they talk about the Bible, how snakes are deemed evil in the Bible, as Rick continues to put his emphasis on how evil or bad things should not be treated as such because it only makes them more evil. As Chelsea lovingly warns him that it won't be that easy to get rid of her. Now again, this episode had a more of a darker tone as we get this scene here with a slightly drunk Punchai saying goodnight to Belinda as she hears and senses something dark or evil in her room. Now, similar to the end of episode 1, episode 2 with Laurie and Jaclyn, now we have Kate all overhearing to what the others are saying about them late at night as Kate is seeing them whispering about her. Which again is going to set up this clash between the friends that I'm really excited for. But we end the episode back with Tim as he is going in his wife's belongings and he takes another pill, and as Vic asks him, is everything okay? We see that he doesn't answer. Now remember the side effects of that pill. Right? It causes paranoia, it causes suicidal thoughts, it causes impaired memory, judgment, and coordination, and combining the substance with alcohol can slow down breathing and potentially lead to death, which it could be a red herring, but I think Timothy's going to probably get hooked on this drug. And again, I think that him saying to his older son that this is going to be a special week, he knows this is going to be the last time he's with his family, and I don't think he's going to want to go home to face the music. I think he's going to take his own life. Now, I'll be honest, this particular episode didn't really move the needle for me. Now, I'm not saying it was terrible or even bad. I just felt a lot of it felt more like subtle setup and moved a lot at a slower pace compared to at least last week's episode. Now, I did think the themes this week were pretty interesting, showing how people use things like religion or politics or drugs to mask their emotions or feelings instead of confronting them head on or facing it more positively or in a more productive way. Now, narratively speaking, it continues to show Timothy's situation only getting worse, and it affects him knowing his perfect life in his eyes that he's built is slowly being destroyed. We have Rick, who's confronting his past, and I know a lot of you all think that he might have been a hitman in his past, or at the very least someone that used to hurt people, and it seems that his past is finally catching up to him. We also have Chelsea, who is kind of being positioned as the person that's going to maybe help him out of his darkest parts of himself. And we'll see who this Frank person is, and little by little, if Rick is getting some type of revenge on Mr. and Mrs. Hollinger. We have Belinda and Greg/Gary being set up. We have the subplots with Lachlan, Piper, and also Sexton and Chloe going on in the background as well. And I would say the friend group's drama so far has been pretty messy, and I'm here for it, and I'm really intrigued to see where it goes. But again, I just felt this episode was missing something. It was missing a bit of uniqueness or intrigue and missing kind of a spark to it. So there you have it. That's the end of this week's breakdown of episode 3 of season 3 of The White Lotus. Now, if you all are still here at this point in the video, shout out to y'all. I appreciate the support. Do me a favor, put in the comments right now, #Justice for Tanya. Now, my favorite part of watching the show, besides being entertained, is reading you all's comments about how you felt about the episode. Share your thoughts about the characters, the story, what worked, what didn't work, your favorite part, your least favorite part, and also your theories and deeper meanings that you all took away in the comments below. Now, if you all enjoyed this week's breakdown, do me a favor and hit that like button. Let's try to get this video to over 1,500 likes, and also consider sharing this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about this show just as much as we do. Now, if this is your first time watching one of my videos, I appreciate you all. I hope you had a good time. Consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel today. And if you all want to take the support even further, besides liking and sharing and subscribing, consider joining the channel memberships, which you all can find the link to that in the description of this video. With all that said, don't forget, you all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.